Stable Diffusion is another AI art generator that is incredibly powerful and modular, allowing you to use different image models and different upscalers and different face fixer tools and things like that. But it can be very kind of nerdy and in the weeds to actually set up for yourself. So in this video, I'm covering two new GUI options, graphical user interface options, for you to run Stable Diffusion on your Windows PC super easily. Again, these do require NVIDIA GPUs, which is unfortunate. If you don't know if you have one or not, go to your task manager. You can do so by right-clicking your start menu and going to task manager. And then in the performance tab here, scroll all the way down, and under your GPU, if you have an NVIDIA one, there will be one that says NVIDIA blah, blah, blah. You'll need something with at least 6 to 8 gigabytes of video memory, which is under dedicated GPU memory here. If you have lower, some of these GUI options have options for you to decrease the usage. But if you have something like, for example, Intel or AMD, these tools will not currently work for it, but I do have a video coming soon on how to run it on AMD, at least in the future. But the two tools that we are going to take a look at, the one that I'm mainly going to focus on here is the Neonsecret or NMKD Stable Diffusion GUI. This is from the developer of FlowFrames. I've covered this back on my main channel. I still need to cover it here. It's an AI frame rate interpolator to make increase the frame rate of your video. He's made his own GUI here. I think it's a he. I don't know. They've made their own GUI here. And then there is another one from Neonsecret here that actually runs with a kind of web server that I will briefly walk through. But since it forcibly hosts it on a public thing at the moment, I'm not as big of a fan of it, but we'll talk about that as we get to it. So first and foremost, let's start with the Neonsecret one. We're just going to go ahead and click download now at the bottom. This is run through itch.io, so it will ask you if you want to support it. I do highly recommend. Even just a couple bucks makes a huge difference to developers like this. I'm actually a Patreon for their FlowFrames thing, so I'm just going to say no thanks, take me to your downloads for now because they already get my money, and download the zip file. Click save. Once it's done downloading, you'll need to open it up with your favorite archive manager. I recommend 7-zip. It's free and open source. Will be linked in the description below. Double click it and you'll need to extract it, or you can choose extract all here at the top in Windows Explorer. Do not try to just open it as a folder in Windows and then run it from there. It will not work. Also, I highly recommend using a directory that doesn't have any spaces in it in your file name. So for example, if we go to my user folder, I have a programs folder I run in here for all my non-install apps to make it easier. I typically put everything in here, but if I click on the path here, you can see here my username for my name has a space in it because Windows these days is kind of dumb about that. And that causes some issues with this GUI sometimes for me. And so I recommend just going to like the root of one of your drives and making a folder for it here. So I've actually done so here on my J drive. I just extracted the folder to this location, and then you're able to run it. Once you have extracted the files, go ahead and run Stable Diffusion GUI.exe. Now it will pop up giving you the warnings that you need at least a 10 series GTX card or newer, how much VRAM you need, blah, blah, blah. Click OK after you've read it. And then we need to go to the settings. It may automatically pop up and ask you that you need to install stuff, at which point you can click OK. Otherwise, come in here to this button right here with the down arrow. This is the installer. All of these checkboxes need to be full before you can run it. So if they're not, there will be an install button right here. Just click it and it will download everything you need. This is what's so cool about this graphics user interface option over running it manually, is you don't have to figure out how to download your own model files, your own upscalers, all of that. It just handles it for you. And in fact, in the new version coming out soon, this is version 1.3.0. In the 1.3.1 version, they're actually giving you an option to support other models because Stable Diffusion regularly updates their image models. And so you'll be able to swap that out on your own, which is pretty cool. But just click install, make sure all of these are done. It'll also have a log at the bottom that says it's done downloading, and we're good to go. Now let's take a look at the rest of the UI here. You've got buttons to support the developer on Patreon, PayPal, and join their Discord server where you can get support, talk about it, things like that. We also have a command line interface here. If you want to interact with the scripting going on and you have all the nerdy details, we're not going to mess with that. You've got a log folder option, so if you are having some issues, it will open up a folder with all the logs for the session. This gets wiped every session, so if you do have an issue, make sure you copy text out of here to go to the Discord before you close the program. And then you have a settings cog. In the settings, you do have a low memory mode. If you have a graphics card with the lower amount of VRAM, as we looked at in your task manager here, if you have less than 8 gigabytes under dedicated GPU memory, for example, this one only has 6, then you can check that box and it will help you out there. You also have use full precision, which is just a super intense mode to run that you need over 24 gigabytes of VRAM to really make use of. Most of you out there won't be able to use it, but if you have some absurd Quadro or A6000 graphics card, you'd be able to use it. Just leave both of those unchecked unless you know that you need it based on what I just said. You also have an image output folder. Before you go anywhere, you need to make this folder. So it defaults to wherever you installed it, Stable Diffusion GUI/images. This folder is not present on startup, and if you try to run it without making that folder yourself, it will throw some sorts of errors. So you need to come in here, make new folder, type in images, and the folder's already there for me because I just made it. But you need to make that folder. You can alternatively set it to another folder directory, but I would still recommend making that images folder here because it will basically render the images there and then copy them to wherever you say, and it freaks out if you don't put that images folder there. I hope in future versions that's either fixed or the images folder is just included by default, but put that there. You can also create a subfolder for each prompt, which means instead of just, because you can also include the prompt in the file name, so you can either put it in the file name itself, so prompt blah 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 .png, or you can make separate folders for each of your prompts, which is useful if you're making a bunch of images based on a specific prompt. And so I tend to use that. We're not going to check it right now. Then you have a couple nerdy options that I want to inform you of real quick before we jump into making stuff with it. When running multiple prompts, use the same starting seed for all of them. So you're able to type in a whole bunch of prompts in this prompt box, one line at a time, and it will start by default with the same seed for all of them. The seed with Stable Diffusion is the noise pattern that it starts with. And a really powerful thing about Stable Diffusion is you can keep iterating on the same seed. Kind of like if you've ever played Minecraft, you can start with the same world seed and you get the same kind of random generation base, even though you can get different details from it. And so you can uncheck this to have each iteration of your prompt kind of show up with different seeds and tackle different things, or you can have it use the same seed so you can get images based on the same idea. This is really powerful, and then there is an advanced mode to let you crank up these sliders even more beyond what's recommended. I recommend leaving that last one unchecked. All right, let's actually make some images. So you have a bunch of options here. Don't get overwhelmed. It's actually pretty straightforward. You have the prompt. This is your text prompt. So a stack of old books with spines facing out, and then some themes of old, worn, fantasy, ancient, magic. You have your number of images to generate. By default, this does 5. That'll take a really long time. You can crank it up if you want. I'm doing 1 at a time right now for this demo. You can either type it in or just use the arrows here and generate however many you want. Then you have the steps. Steps is the level of detail. Typically, from what I have seen, it's recommended to do between 25 and 50-ish steps. If you go beyond that, it will take a very long time and you start to see less and less actual good results in return. But you can do that if you want. And then you have a scale number, which is the creativeness. By default, this is about 7 to 8 for most programs. However, you can type it in or crank it up however much you want. The higher you go, the more chaotic that it will get. So it's like if you've used Midjourney, it's the chaos or the stylized thing where it gets further and further away from what you've actually made. And I'll have some resources in the description below with a matrix of the creativeness and the steps if you want to visualize it for yourself. And then the lower you go, the more it adheres to your prompt, but it may not, if there's any detail you didn't specify, it won't include it. So the defaults are fine to play with at first, but you can get more detail by turning this up within reason. Less detail if you want a simplistic image or it's adding too many arbitrary details. And then with the second slider, how far it adheres, how far it gets away from or how strictly it adheres to the direct literal words that you typed in the prompt. Next up, you have the seed. I just explained what a seed is. -1 is the default as it randomizes the noise that it uses to generate each prompt. But if you have one that turned out a great result and you want to keep building on that same one to find the exact image and it has the right framework, then you can type that seed in here and it'll just keep using that same one to generate your images. Then you have your resolution. By default is 512 by 512. If you have a lower GPU memory graphics card, as we've covered just a minute ago, you'll want to turn that down perhaps a little bit to 256 by 256. If you have a super high-end gaming one like my RTX 3090 here with 24 gigabytes of VRAM, you can crank it up a little bit, but you'll want to close other stuff going on in the background because you can only crank it up so much before it's like, you don't got enough memory. You can also use this to control the aspect ratio. So I can make it wider than it is high to make widescreen images, things like that. Pretty straightforward. It can only be in multiples of 64, but it automatically kind of controls that for you with the slider there, as you can see. You have different samplers to choose from. I'm not going to explain what that is in this video. I recommend just leaving it on the default, but we'll talk about it in a future video. And then you have an option to generate seamless tileable images for generating patterns, which is very exciting and we'll explore in another video. All right, we're going to go ahead and click generate. Obviously right here, you have your image preview that it will give you. You have options for post-processing, which is just going to be upscaling right now. You can do 2, 4x right here. And then you also have face restoration using the GFP-GAN tool that we looked at in my How to Fix AI Faces video. I'm going to leave it at 0.5. It goes from 0 to 1. From what I've seen in the support Discord, it doesn't really do a whole lot past 0.5, but you can mess with it. So 4x upscale and 0.5 face restoration. You can open the folder to where your image is output to. You can share them and then go between all of your generated images. Let's generate one. Gives you a little console at the bottom to tell you what's happening as you render. And while that renders, I want to tell you, if you have a specific error that comes up about unable to create process, or either it just says that it didn't generate any images and session log copy to clipboard and can't figure out what's going on, delete the entire install folder you just made and re-extract it from the zip file. Again, make sure you don't have any spaces in the directory name if you can avoid it, and then re-download all your models and stuff. And that was the fix for me after 2 days of troubleshooting and delaying this video. That's all I got. All right, it's generating our image. So we can open up Task Manager here, go to Performance, and scroll down to our graphics card. You can see here we're using a fair significant amount, although some of that's for all of our OBS instances, of course, but our GPU memory has spiked. It was usually around 10 gigabytes. Now it's up to 17, generating this image, and we have a stack of books. It is still downloading it's downloading the upscalers and the face fixer model right now. So it already generated our image. And in fact, in the images folder, we can see that image right here, but it can't upscale it or try to fix faces yet because it needs to download those required files. But again, the benefit of the GUI here is that it's doing all of this for you, so you just have to wait. However, I told it to do a face fix, and there's no faces in this, but it's downloading the models to do all of that post-processing we just specified, and I just love that it handles it all for you. Like this is what this channel is all about, is taking these tools which are really complicated and obnoxious to set up by hand if you're not a super techie, and knocking down the barriers, making it easy for you. All right, it says it has finished, and we now also have an upscaled one. So we went from 640 by 512 to 2560 by 2048. And what I love about this upscaler model is you don't need, I mean, obviously you can only go up to 4x here, so this is the highest resolution that we have, but it's not a low resolution by any stretch. Like that's a pretty significant jump. And if we zoom in on this one, that's pretty blurry. Like that was a pretty nice difference. You don't need to buy gigapixel or something like that if you're just happy to go with the, output resolution you get. So that's the NMKDs one. It's the one I recommend the most for complete newbies here now. I know I recommended the G-Risk GUI before, but this one I'm liking a lot more. But I'm going to show you the Neon Guy one from GitHub as well that uses the web server, just for sake of thoroughness. This got posted on the Stable Diffusion Reddit today, and it is actually pretty awesome. It's from a user called Neonsecret. Now, there's two different downloads that you could use. The first one is what you use if you have no clue what I'm about to talk about, in which case it's 8 gigabytes, and I'm going to show you how to download it in a moment. There's a smaller 4 gigabyte one if you already have a .ckpt file that is an image model base that you've gotten from somewhere else on the internet. If you had no clue what that is, just download the 8 gigabyte one. It's going to take you to this mega download, and just click download and wait for it to save, and then we're going to extract it with your favorite archive manager. I use 7-zip. I'll have it linked below. If you don't know what that is and you're using the Windows Explorer thing, make sure you extract it before you try to run it. Now, I'm going to put it in my own programs folder. In my user folder here in Windows, I have a dedicated folder just called programs, and I recommend you making one like that because your user folder is where all your settings and your basic things are, and a lot of people try installing things in a bunch of different places. It's a lot easier to just back up your one user folder whenever you're moving Windows installs or making backups, and so I have a dedicated programs folder for all of my kind of portable programs that don't need installed. So I'm going to just drag the Stable Diffusion GUI over here and wait for it to extract. All right, once you have extracted the files and go into your folder, you can close 7-zip or whatever your archive was. You have a bunch of bat files that you'll need to run. So start with number 0. Done. Start with number 1. Well, continue to number 1. This is going to download everything needed to run Stable Diffusion. So we're talking a program called Python, a program called Anaconda, as well as all the image model files and all that nerdy stuff you'd normally have to manage yourself. This is doing it for you. Once it's done, click OK. If that errored out, hit the Windows key and the R key, type in CMD for command prompt, and assuming you're on Windows 11, if you're on Windows 10, I'll just have link in the description for instructions for you. But type in winget, W-I-N-G-E-T, space G-I-T for Git, and hit enter. Actually, I'm sorry. It's winget install Git for Git. And it's going to download and find that specific program, which is used to download archives and things like that. I already have it, so we're good to go. But that is, if you're getting an error about Git not being recognized or something, you need that. Now we can move on to some other options. We've done the clear workspace thing, which doesn't matter, and install bat. Now we have 3 different bat files that we can use. There's image to image for inpainting, which is actually editing an image. There's image to image, which is taking a source image and either modifying that or using it as an inspiration for Stable Diffusion. Or there's text to image, which is just your standard text prompt. We're going to start with that. So double click that bat file. If you get an error about some procedure node thing, just click OK. Wait for it to load all this going on. All right, now it is opening a web URL for you to control Stable Diffusion from your web browser. So you can see here 127.0.0.1:7860. So let's go to that real quick. I'm already forgetting. 7860. Enter. You can see here we have a lovely GUI where you just run it from your web browser that you can bookmark, and then as long as you leave this up, you have access to it. However, keep in mind, this does make a public URL. There's a debate in the Reddit forum about why this is the case. I'm not a fan of it. This means that while this is left running, theoretically someone could go to this Gradio.app and access your own Stable Diffusion, which is kind of sus. However, you can see here there's an error where it's not actually forwarding the ports for that to be possible for me anyway. They're going to add an option to change that. In the meantime, just close it when you're done and rerun it when you want to. But we have a GUI here. I don't know why I keep trying to call it something else, where you have all the different options for Stable Diffusion. So you have a bunch of different bars and things like that here. Obviously, the first one here is a text prompt. Same as Midjourney, all that. I have prompt crafting videos linked to the description. This is how you tell it what you want it to generate. Then you have the steps. The steps being the level of detail. Typically, from what I have seen so far, around 25 to 50-ish is recommended. Any more than that, and you're going to get kind of some ridiculousness going on here. And then you have iterations, which I believe is how many like versions of the image that it will make. You have an output directory for where it actually saves those images to. The format, PNG or JPEG. PNG will be the highest quality. Just stick with that. You have some other settings you don't really need to mess with, but of course you have here the scale. The scale is going to be how closely it adheres to the text prompt that you give. If you crank it up, it's going to try to stay as close as possible, but it's going to like what's usually referred to as deep fry your kind of image and end up looking kind of funky. We're going to leave most of this on its own. Obviously, height and width are your resolution aspects, how big of an image. If you go bigger than 512 by 512, you're going to have a hard time running this on most graphics cards, even higher end ones. But you can mess with it to be wider than taller for different aspect ratios and things like that. Your seed. So the seed is the random noise plot that it generates to base your image on. A cool thing about Stable Diffusion is that if you find a specific seed that's getting you very close to what you want, you can keep using that seed to figure out the right prompts to get what you want. By default, it's just going to be randomized, which is what you want it to be. So we're going to type in our prompt, which is a stack of old books, spines facing out, and then some themes of fantasy, worn, ancient. We're going to leave everything on defaults for now, and we're going to click Submit. It's telling you how long it takes to render the image. It's rendering, and if we open up our task manager and go to that GPU 0, you can see here it is hitting our graphics card pretty hard, and we're starting to crank up our GPU memory. Now, this dedicated GPU memory is how much you will need in order to run Stable Diffusion. By default, it's typically recommended you need a minimum of 8 gigabytes, which on newer gaming graphics cards is totally fine. But then if you start increasing the resolution, you're going to need 12 to 24, and that gets kind of funky. But we're going to let it do its thing here. All right, and it's done. You can see here, samples finished in 1.341 minutes and exported to this folder, which we can hopefully find here. Workspace. Images, yeah, text image. You can see here we have a 512 by 512 PNG of a stack of books with the spines facing out, and that's kind of, I was hoping for a vertical stack, but I didn't specify that, and otherwise, That's more or less what we described. So that is pretty rad right there, ready to go. And then if we up the iterations, I'm going to say 5. I'm going to say Charizard as Godzilla destroying, spelling, Tokyo. And choose submit. I also want to talk about down here, there is a checkbox for full precision. By default, most Stable Diffusion generators run at what's called half precision, which means it spends half as long as it theoretically would need to generate your image. If you do full precision, you may crash if you don't have enough of that video memory that we talked about, and it's going to take potentially twice as long. I'm going to leave it on half for now, but if you're trying to generate like the best of the best quality and you have the hardware to back it up, you might want to mess with that. I'm going to click submit on our new prompt, and it's going to theoretically generate 5 images, but it's going to take significantly longer because it took that long just to generate 1. So we'll be back after it generates our 5 images. And here you can see it has generated previews of our 5 images of Charizard as Godzilla destroying Tokyo, which has made a new folder. And now we got 5 lovely PNGs to play with. These are kind of creative. Obviously, we didn't specify any like styles or anything, so they're just kind of like cartoon drawings. But as a start, it's pretty rad. Now, this is just the text to image bat. If we close this and close that command prompt, you can see here it has like a log of everything going on. We can actually go back and run the image to image, for example. So if we run that one, and you can run all these separately and get different like connection URLs for them, but we're just going to run this one. Again, approve that error. So far, I don't think that actually matters. Let it do its thing, and then we're going to get a URL to connect to in just a moment. Looks like it's the same 7860, but now we're using image to image. So now we can drag in, for example, one of the images we already created, such as the Charizard. Drag image. And now we type in our prompt. Charizard as Godzilla destroying Tokyo. But we want to change the style a bit. So we want brutalist, gothic, fantasy, and then we're going to throw it for a loop and also add Neo Tokyo. We're going to leave everything else the same. You could obviously kind of expand upon it or whatever, but we're going to leave everything else the same and click submit. We're only doing one for the iterations. That's just one image. We're just going to do that and click submit. Give it a minute to generate that, and that is going to put it in a separate folder because we have our images. There's the text to image and there's the image to image. So that's where our new image is going to show up in just a moment using this one as an image prompt. And there we go. We now have a new image of basically the same thing from a different angle. It didn't really change the style that much. I think it just tried to edit it a little bit, which is kind of the point of image to image. But it wasn't able to really insert some of the style because it was already starting from a similar thing. But you can see here it appeared in our folder. Same idea, I just kind of turned it around and tweaked it a bit. This is just an introduction video. I want to say now, I have a lot more content on Stable Diffusion and how to get the best results from it coming soon. I just wanted to get you kind of familiar with the tools that you can use to utilize Stable Diffusion, because with Midjourney, it was all about using Discord and things like that, whereas with Stable Diffusion, it's kind of do it yourself, and so I want to get you familiar with some of these GUI user interface tools to do so. I do hope you found these tutorials helpful. It is a blast playing around with these tools. And yes, I do have more detailed videos coming on all the ins and outs of Stable Diffusion as we go. I'm still catching up to it myself, and it's constantly changing. So there's a lot to unpack, and I want to make it kind of as accessible as Midjourney might be for you all. And I'm working on getting a Discord bot set up as well so that we can use that too, which should be a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe here on Analog Dreams. Check out my art, both analog, glitch art, and AI art, things like that for sale. On my thread list, linked below. I just got some of my shirts in. They turned out wonderful. I also just got my notebook in. Turned out wonderful. Love it. So, links to stuff in the description. And remember to be kind. Rewind.